Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 126th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. The topic of comprehensive immigration reform has been running hot and cold for the last 35 years with no resolution. It is currently running hot again, and because of biased reporting and misleading political rhetoric, it's difficult to know for sure exactly what's happening and who supports what potential solution. So we turn to our panel, whose knowledge and judgment in this case is as good as anyone's, and I'm convinced better. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left, Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. And on his left is Tom Finley, co-founder of Great Lakes Resource Center. Patty, maybe a good place to begin this discussion is with the most recent controversy, the separation of children from parents. What are your thoughts?
I believe that was one of the most egregious, reprehensible moves that have been made by a government official in quite a long time. I know that President Trump said that it was not him that did this, that it was the Democrats, which was not at all factual. There was a law that said that children could not be kept imprisoned for more than 20 days, which is why they were released quite often with their parents, and the parents were let go because the children could not be placed in jail. He was the one, through executive order and through Jeff Sessions, decided that it would be best to separate children from their parents immediately and place them in a containment center where they had really no contact with their parents, even though they said they did. In some cases, some of them have still not spoken with their parents. The sad part about it, I feel that this was done, as well as the enforcement of, or the repeal of the DACA ruling. This was done as a way to extort the other side and use children to get their or his ideas on immigration put through. And I find that reprehensible.
You mean like the wall?
Like the wall, right. He has his pillars, and I've heard them. President Trump has stated that he will talk to Democrats if they come see him. He'll listen to things, but he's made it very clear the only immigration plan that he will accept is the one that contains his 4 pillars. And I understand that he wants those, but there's no compromise there on that side. And to use children in this manner is reprehensible. For a party that claims to represent family values and the strength of the family, I just heard a Republican recently talking about part of the problem is that the families aren't valued in these Central American countries. And if the families were valued better, this would all be over. And yet when they come there, what do they do here? They rip that family apart. I think it's horrible. I know there was just a ruling, I think it was the day before yesterday, by a judge in Southern California that stated that children under 5 at this point have to be placed back with their parents within 14 days, and those 5 and over have 30 days to be put back with their parents. The problem is this whole program was put forth so poorly that the government doesn't really know where all of these kids are. You know, they were shipped to New York, they were shipped to Michigan, they were shipped to Georgia, all over the place. And you know, if you're taking a 5-month-old baby or a 2-year-old child and shipping them to New York, do you think that they have the ability to tell you who their mom and dad are and to help in any way in lining them back up with their parents? And I'm just amazed that this is going on. And the whole thing sounds so awful to me. I mean, that is so bad. But I look at President Trump, whose wife is an immigrant. He wants all of these immigration laws stopped. but yet he used the genius visa to bring his wife in to the country. Her parents were just recently brought in and are going to obtain citizenship through chain migration, something that he rails against. And how can you be taken seriously when you claim that these things are for our national safety and we have to do this unless it applies to me, in which case I can take advantage of all of these things, and then once I get the use out of them, then I'll outlaw them. So
Well, you're certainly not on the fence on this.
I am
issue.
not at all on the fence on this issue. No.
Can I ask you a question before we start, Bryan?
Sure.
In view of what the things Patty just said, here you're confronted with a family at the border trying to enter illegally. What do you do with them? It seems like you've got a few options. You can separate the children from the parents and put the children in a children's facility and the adults in an adult facility. Or you can put them all in the same facility, turn them all back, or let them all into the U.S. unhindered. It seems like you've only got 4 choices. Is there another one that I'm missing?
No, and they're both, all of the choices have some unintended consequences. I'd like to maybe spend a few minutes. Go ahead.
Let maybe just expand on one of these. Can you put the children and adults together in an adult facility, knowing that also there are real bad adults in there that have been smuggling people into the...
I think one of the problems that exists is that when what looks to be a family shows up at the border, might not be a family.
Yeah.
And there's very little, I guess, ways, there are very few ways to determine, is that really a family?
They're a small percentage.
No, it's not a small percentage.
It is a small percentage.
It's not a small percentage.
It's 10,000 out of 12 children came without their parents.
Right. And see, this has been an issue that's been going on for a long time. Most of the pictures that you've been seeing have been taken, either they're staged, pictures of little kids in cages. That was from 2014 and 2015.
One picture.
But that picture went around the world. It went viral. And they made it seem, they took a little picture of a little girl that was having a bad day. It was on I think it was on the cover of Time magazine with Trump there. The fact of the matter is, most people will admit, and even Mr. Obama's DHS secretary admitted, that they thought that was the best thing to do, was to separate kids. It just didn't get any media. They were separating families from the get-go. And when they called these places concentration camps and all that kind of stuff, I think we're really not being totally honest with what these places really are. Now, it might not be the ideal situation for a 5-year-old, but as I did a little bit of research and started reading up on this, what they try to do is place them first with a relative. When the children come, either unaccompanied or with a parent, the parent, because they're here illegally, we have no way. They're going to be deported. The system requires them to go in front of a judge. That takes time. There's a backlog. So what do? I'm not for separating real families. If there was a way to determine if that was a real family, if these people were coming with documents, which most of them don't, there would be a way. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the Homeland Security, Immigration, they try to find a family member. And if they can't, they find a sponsor. This whole notion that we're sending kids hither and yon that we don't know, from what I understand, the Department of Homeland Security turns them over to another agency, and it just came out that they know where exactly all the kids are. It's just not within that one particular agency. So this notion that all of a sudden we've got 2- and 3-year-olds floating around in Georgia somewhere that nobody knows where they're at. They're either with a relative, a sponsoring family, or with a foster family. There are tons of kids in foster homes, okay? Not only immigrant kids, but regular kids, okay? If I had children and I was arrested and there was nobody to take those kids, they would end up in a foster home somewhere. Now, you might want to characterize that foster home as a prison or a concentration camp or a detention center, But the fact of the matter is it's a foster home. So this is a nice problem for the media to magnify. It's been going on. I mean, you can pull up the picture of Bill Clinton, who sent in his ICE agents at gunpoint, and they took that little Cuban. Exactly. That little kid was in Miami. He was with relatives. His mother had died, bringing him here. Forget it. He's gone back because his dad's in Cuba. He's gone back, and we're going to take him. Nobody circulates that picture. Okay, but it gets a lot of news when all of a sudden they decide to enforce the law. Now, I will admit, I'm not for separating families. If we can prove that that's a family, then we'll put them in a situation. We don't hear about the sponsors that take families while they're working their way through the immigration system. We don't hear any of that.
In the research that you've done, how many kids are we talking about?
What I found was that there were 89,000 kids during the Obama administration that were separated from their parents. And from what I understand, it's somewhere in the 12 to 15,000 children that are currently in these established centers, and I don't know what you want to call them, but I know they're not prisons because they went in, they were able to go around because of privacy rules. They couldn't interview all the kids. They're playing games, they're getting school, they've got doctors, they've got dentists, they're getting better treatment, but they're not just out running around. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so, some firebrand people go down to one in Texas. It's been there for years. These people have been operating these particular facilities for years. They just didn't spring up overnight. They've been there during the Clinton administration, the Bush administrations, and heaven forbid, the Obama administration. They've been there. These people have been running these centers for years, and they're complying with the law. They're doing everything they possibly can to make the situation. They had the one reporter, it's like, you have 4 kids to a room. Well, heavens, you go to a boarding school, how many kids do you have in a room? How many kids get fed at the high school on a daily basis? They were complaining that they had over 100 kids were standing in line for food. Well, what, give me a break.
Excuse me, but you're confusing kids that come here unaccompanied with kids that come with a parent. And that's what's new, that's what's different. There's something like 3,000 have been taken that way. The parent is there, they've asked for asylum, and they have taken that child away from them. No, they're not concentration camps. But please, don't tell me.
You can use asylum all you want. The fact is that there is a fair amount of people that come to the border with no documents whatsoever. They can't prove that that's their kid. So what do you do? They're here illegally. I'm a citizen. You're a citizen.
We'll get into that a little bit later because I want to find out. Well, anyway. Ron.
Bryan, you got to be careful you don't come off as being devil's advocate here for the president, because you could be misconstrued here. I don't really disagree with things you're saying here. I mean, these are true things. I don't think immigration is going to be a problem. I think Donald Trump has it right. No one's going to want to come here eventually. I was sure would hesitate, and that's what Jeff Sessions says. It's going to be a deterrent to take the kids away from you. Now, there are 2 kinds of people here. People say illegals. We have signed the Geneva Convention that we should welcome people who are political refugees who are in danger back at home if they were sent back, and that's happening. I heard, you can talk about NPR as being a liberal bastion, and indeed it is to some extent, but I happened to hear a piece yesterday afternoon driving about in the car about a fellow who came here twice with his 12-year-old daughter. She's been taken away. He's been sent back to Guatemala, where he came here because he was in danger from gang warfare in his home, and he's back there now. And while the interviewer was there, he got a phone call from his daughter. She's someplace in mid-America with a foster home, and she's not happy. Daddy, can you come and get me, she says. So there's a human face on this. You can't deny it. You just can't. And so I think you have to make a distinction between, and I'm sure there's a number of people, a couple of folks who come in with the idea, perhaps terrorizing somebody and pick up a kid along the way and say, here's, let us in. Yeah, I suppose that happens. However, not a heck of a lot of terrorism from immigrants. Not much at all.
Let me ask you this, Ron. Patty indicated there were probably 3,000 that had been separated from their families.
Since the decree, yeah.
Yeah, I heard two, but we won't
Yeah.
argue that. In the meantime, we've got over 2 million homeless children in this country. Where is the outrage and the outpouring of grief over that?
Somebody beat on you on Facebook about that very
No,
question.
not that question. No.
About homeless and people whose.
I know. It's my daughter or granddaughter's boyfriend.
Yeah.
He loves to do that.
But even so, well, homelessness is a big problem in many of our cities.
Incidentally, he beat up on me over the 5 million that were separated from parents by the justice system.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course. I lived for 15, 16 years in Danbury, Connecticut, an East Coast, more or less East Coast city. There was a good size homeless population. As far as I don't know so much about the children. There were agencies involved with trying to take care of that. There were a hardcore group of adults who didn't mind being homeless. That's what they wanted to do. They would go to the shelters occasionally for a shower or for a free meal, but and there was one I volunteered spent a couple of nights in overnight overflow situation from the local shelter, and there were lots of homeless folks there who had jobs, who were going to in the morning, just any place to live, especially in Danbury, much more expensive than here. So I don't know about the children's population there, but I think that is another social ill that we have. There is a degree of homelessness, and we need to be aware of it. We need to try to get our social agencies under control to do that.
Okay, I'm depending on Tom Finley to turn this whole discussion on its ear.
Whoa. Okay, well, let me try that. Just staying with the conversation for a moment, past and present actions have ignored this. We know that separating children leads to psychological damage that can't be calculated. The younger, the more, regardless of how well thought through the processes are. That's an outcome that's negative. Now, so starting with that, how could you even agree with the present practices and past practices? So I stepped back and as I usually do, and say symptom or problem. And clearly, we're dealing with symptoms now of ineffective policy and procedure in immigration. This has been a problem for 4, 5 presidents and longer. We've never solved it. And I would suggest that, first of all, we should set up policy that's based upon the outlook that these are resources. This is a resource to us.
Immigrants.
Immigrants. And consequently, there'll be 2 key policies that I just jotted these down. There's something like this that would be used to govern whatever practices we put in place. So policies and procedures shall be employed that will maintain the humanitarian values of our culture. Policy and procedures shall be established that will support the efforts to maintain population growth needed to sustain economic growth. 2 governing factors around which law, policy, procedures, practices could be put in place that would result in positive approaches to this problem. Until such things go on, we're victim of, if you want to call it a strategy of our key leader, he creates drama around which then actions take place. They take place, but it may not be what we want. So that's where I've come, John, in terms of this. I'm appalled that as a country and our leadership, and I go beyond the president when I say that, allows this to happen.
Also, the birth rate in this country has declined.
1.7.
We don't have enough people to take care of old people
We don't.
unless we import them.
That's right. And that will affect our
And-
economic growth big time.
And to harvest their strawberries.
All right. Yeah.
And pay their Social Security.
And do their landscaping.
We've had a problem with that humanitarian thing in this country since about 1620, I think, when we first started coming in and suppressing the native population. We happened to be visiting on a bus trip up into the Canadian Rockies, and we stopped in Alberta. We visited a museum there, and happened to hit on an address by a First Nations person. And she was recounting the procedure there and in the United States of taking the children away from their families and shipping them off to boarding schools. I've since that read some first-person accounts, individuals who this happened to. The person was taken from someplace in Kansas and taken to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, as was Jim Thorpe, the famous
Carlisle
There was an
Indians.
Indian school there, the
Yeah.
Carlisle Indian School. It's, building's still there. So we're not that, and the boatloads of Jewish immigrants that were turned away in the first part of World War II, and they didn't actually separate families with the Japanese internment, but you know
The
all that
whole
kind of thing.
concept of illegal immigrants is fairly new in our history.
Yeah.
I mean, well, actually, right from the beginning, I think George Washington insisted that only white Europeans could immigrate to the United States, but it was in the 20s, I think, that one of the first immigration laws was passed to prevent Chinese people from coming. They were taking jobs away and so forth. But it's only been lately, with the influx of a lot of people from south of our border, that we've had the concept of illegal immigration sort of put into our brains. But one of the problems I think we have is in communication and how we use our social media and our commercial media to distort facts so totally. Most of us don't even know what the
Did you ever hear
truth
about yellow journalism? It isn't a new thing, John.
Well, not
It's just more easily widespread
and a
quicker.
lot more powerful now than it ever was. But just thinking about, the First Lady went to McAllen, Texas, and interviewed some people who were in charge of a center there that took care of children. And the story was that the children come usually into the system from a long trek across the desert, and they're infected with diseases and scabies and lice and all that. And the first thing they do is to give them medical treatment, clean them up, clothe them, feed them, and put them in facilities that are clean and safe and comfortable. Now, you may be able to take photographs and make it look like an army barracks that I spent time in, and maybe you did as a...
My father did.
Yeah. But...
Went to plenty of Boy Scout summer camps.
But you compare that to what some media like to portray as ripping children out of the arms of their parents, throwing them into cages and kennels, and mistreating them. So you're going to believe whatever your biases tell you to believe.
I don't think that, and I don't believe that these children were mistreated physically. I know they were given food. I know they were given medical care, but they are not permitted to leave these places, so they are, in a sense, imprisoned. Yeah. It is not a concentration camp. It's not even close to that, and I think that was wrong to exaggerate. But they were taken from their parents.
Yes, they were.
With the children crying. You mentioned Melania Trump's visit there. We heard very little about it. Her trip had to be cut short because of bad weather, unfortunately, and that unbelievable decision to wear that jacket. Oh my goodness. I mean, where were her aides to say that's probably not the best choice of things to wear. So,
You know, I think it was probably a message to me. I think it was probably a message to the media. I don't care, do you? You know,
but you're on your way to
I know.
a center for children to see how they're doing, and that's the message on your back, optics-wise.
I think Trump
that
will buy
was-
one for each member of the cabinet.
was better. She is going back there, I think, today, if I'm not mistaken.
Not to McAllen. She's going
to Texas somewhere, I thought.
Remember, this man creates drama in any way, shape, or form. And there it was. And whether that was deliberate or not, I don't know. We would say it was dumb, but there was drama, all kinds of drama created around it, and the president's back in the headlines again and again and again. He gets press. I would suggest where there's another kind of flag that we should, and anytime a flag is raised by our leaders around negative outcomes, protect our borders, sounds like a lofty kind of thing. It assumes there's enemies over there. You see, and the assumption of that's a negative concept. It's boogeyman thinking. It's reactive, and the list goes on.
Well, we know that there are gangs coming across the MS-13, unless that's all a fabrication. I don't
No,
know.
Well,
and there
and
are
no drugs
There
coming
are, but
across.
for the most part, they're not coming with children. And to say that, the comments
No, but
that I've
Tom's
heard.
talking about protecting the border.
But
Yeah, and it's-
but there's to say that Democrats want the MS-13 to come in.
Well, we have
but
enemies.
unfortunately, social media has given both sides the megaphone, and I mean,
To say anything.
and all of a sudden it's true and all that kind of stuff. So, I just go back to the point that, and I want to make sure people understand, I'm not for separating children from families. But these particular centers, these particular rules and procedures have been in place for years.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for years. It's just that now all of a sudden, the megaphone is out there. They're looking at it. We're not even talking about that now because there's a Supreme Court vacancy.
People are going to say you're implying it's okay since it's been around for a long time.
Oh, I'm not saying it. I'm saying they've been doing it. Whether it, it wasn't okay.
Well,
Sounds like
we're
it wasn't
going
okay,
to we're
but-
going to
but
have to
every
wrap
administration
it
has
up
been
right
doing it.
there. I know you guys would like to keep on doing this, but we got zeros on the clock. Thank you very much.